Rain hammered the cafe windows as Ella stumbled, the tray slipping from her hands. A hiss of steam, a gasp. Coffee splashed across Victor Hale's $1,000 suit. Time froze. Her heart pounded in her ears. His gaze met hers. Sharp, unreadable anger, or something far more dangerous? Ella was only 22, but life had already carved worry lines across her face. Morning shifts at the cafe, nights cleaning offices. Every dollar she earned vanished into rent, overdue bills, and her little brother's school fees. Her shoes leaked when it rained. Her hands, rough from soap and steaming cups, never stopped moving. Some nights when the world slept, she sat by the cracked window of her tiny apartment, whispering prayers into the dark. She didn't ask for much, just a break, a chance to breathe without debt choking her dreams. But life never gave her pauses. It only gave her choices, keep fighting or fall apart. So Ella kept fighting, carrying trays with a smile that hid exhaustion, until that rainy evening, when a single misstep sent hot coffee across a billionaire's suit and unknowingly changed her entire future forever. Victor Hale sat alone at the corner table, the weight of empires on his shoulders. The rain outside drummed a slow rhythm, but inside the cafe seemed to hold its breath around him. He was the man whispered about in boardrooms, the one who could buy failing companies before breakfast and crush rivals by lunch. Competitors called him ruthless. Investors called him a genius. The tabloids called him untouchable, but today wasn't about mergers or headlines. Today, it was about the poor waitress standing frozen in front of him, her apron stained, her eyes wide with panic. Hot coffee dripped from the sleeve of his $7,000 Italian suit onto the polished floor. Conversations around them fell quiet. Every eye waited for the explosion, the anger, the demand for payment, the scene everyone expected. Victor didn't move, didn't speak. His gaze held Ella's steady, unreadable. A storm behind calm eyes. Something far deeper than anger stirred there, something even he didn't expect. "I'm so sorry." Ella's voice cracked, barely louder than the rain tapping on the cafe windows. Her hands trembled as she reached for a napkin, dabbing uselessly at his sleeve, the heat rising in her face. Victor didn't flinch. He didn't push her away. He simply watched her, silent, unreadable. Most men in his position would have exploded by now, demanded the manager, the owner, maybe even her job. But Victor Hale stayed perfectly still, his expression calm in a way that felt unsettling. Ella's breath came fast, her eyes shining with panic. "I can pay for cleaning. Somehow," she whispered, though both of them knew she couldn't. For a moment, their eyes locked. Something in hers, fear, exhaustion, maybe a glimmer of stubborn hope, seemed to hold him there. And then, so softly she almost didn't hear, he said, "It's fine." No anger. No demands, just two words that felt heavier than the storm outside. It was the first time anyone had seen Victor Hale let go of control. From the back table, a snicker cracked the silence. Then another. Soon the waiters near the counter were laughing behind their hands, like schoolkids watching a cruel prank unfold. To them, it was simple, a poor girl ruining a rich man's day. Nothing more. Nothing less. Ella felt every sound hit her like a slap. The soft chuckles. The whispered jokes. The kind of laughter that makes you wish you could vanish before the next one lands. Her face burned hot. Humiliation crawled up her neck, tightening her chest. She bent quickly to gather the empty cup, her voice trembling as she murmured, I'll clean this up." The laughter grew quieter but sharper, like knives scraping glass. Ella bit her lip hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. Across the table, Victor Hale watched, silent, expression unreadable, as if he knew this moment wasn't about spilled coffee at all. The cafe door slammed as her manager stormed in, face flushed, apron swinging behind him. He didn't look at the mess on the floor. He didn't even glance at the billionaire's ruined suit. His glare was locked on Ella. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" he hissed, voice low but sharp enough to cut the air. Ella nodded slowly, throat tight. Of course she knew. Everyone in the city knew the name Victor Hale. But what choice had she really had? The tray had slipped. Life had been heavier than her hands tonight. "I can fix this," she started. But the words felt small, useless. "You've embarrassed this cafe," he snapped, eyes darting toward Victor, who still hadn't moved or spoken. The whole room waited. Breath held. Victor's silence somehow made the manager's anger feel louder. That night, Ella sat on the floor of her tiny apartment. A jar of coins spilled out in front of her. Quarters, nickels, pennies rubbed smooth from years of passing through tired hands. She counted slowly, lips moving with the numbers, as if speaking them softly would somehow make them grow. Rent was due in 3 days. Electricity already had a warning notice on the door. And now, because of one clumsy mistake, she might not even have the job that kept her from drowning, the same job that barely paid enough to keep the lights on, but was all she had left. Her back ached. Her eyes burned. But life didn't pause for exhaustion. It never had. She scooped the coins back into the jar, set it on the windowsill, and stared out at the rain. Tomorrow would come, like it always did, but tomorrow wasn't ordinary. The next morning, the cafe doors swung open, and in walked Victor Hale, no sharp suit. No polished shoes. Just a plain jacket and the same unreadable face. Ella froze behind the counter, the tray in her hands trembling. Her heart pounded as memories of the spilled coffee flooded back. She waited for the explosion, the complaints, the threats, maybe even a lawsuit, but Victor said nothing like that. He walked to the counter calmly, eyes scanning the menu as if yesterday hadn't happened. "Black coffee," he said, his voice even. Then, after a pause, "And tell Ella I'd like a word." The entire cafe went silent. Ella felt her stomach twist. He knew her name. Somehow that felt scarier than anger. She wiped her hands on her apron, nerves buzzing, and walked over. Victor studied her closely, as if he saw something no one else did. Not clumsiness. Not failure. Something else entirely. Victor sat at the corner table, the steam from his coffee curling between them like a secret. He didn't rush. He didn't explain. He simply watched Ella shift nervously, her apron clutched tight in both hands. Finally, he spoke. "I need someone honest," he said, voice low but steady. "Someone who doesn't pretend to be something they're not." He took a slow sip, eyes never leaving hers. "You need money. Work for me. 1 month." The words hung there, heavy as the rain beating the windows. Ella blinked, unsure if she heard right. Work for him? A billionaire? Her first thought was escape. People like him didn't offer favors without a price. Was this kindness? Or a trap wrapped in silk words? I don't understand," she whispered. "You will," Victor said simply, sliding a small card across the table. 1 month. Start tomorrow." Ella stared at the card, her pulse thundering. Her life was about to change. Whether for better or worse, she couldn't tell. The car rolled through towering iron gates and Ella felt her throat tighten. Victor's home wasn't a home. It was a kingdom built from marble and glass. The driveway alone looked longer than her entire block. Inside, ceilings soared like they were holding up the sky. Chandeliers glittered above her head, dripping gold light onto floors polished to a mirror shine. Every corner smelled faintly of roses and money. Ella clutched her thrift store purse like it might keep her grounded. Her shoes squeaked softly on the marble as she walked, each sound reminding her she didn't belong here. A maid carried fresh flowers past her without a glance. A man in a suit whispered into a headset, eyes on the floor. People here moved like a well-rehearsed play, and she was the extra who'd wandered on stage by mistake. She felt smaller with every step, but something told her this was only the beginning. The mansion had its own rhythm, phones ringing, footsteps echoing down marble halls, doors closing softly like secrets being kept. Ella moved quietly through it all, trying to learn where things were, what was expected, how not to get in anyone's way. But the whispers followed her. "The coffee girl," someone murmured near the office door. "Won't last a week." She heard it again near the kitchen. Low laughter under someone's breath. They didn't bother hiding it. Victor's assistant, a sharp-eyed man in a grey suit, looked her over like she was a stain on the rug. His smirk said everything his words didn't. Ella kept her head down, pretending not to hear, but each whisper cut a little deeper. She'd already lived through a lifetime of people doubting her. But somehow here, under crystal chandeliers and painted ceilings, their judgment felt heavier, like they were all waiting for her to fail. Ella quickly learned this wasn't a normal job. She handled Victor's calls, organized meetings, fetched documents from rooms bigger than her entire apartment. Some days, she drove across the city delivering sealed envelopes without asking questions. Other days she sat quietly in boardrooms, taking notes while men in suits argued about millions. But it wasn't the tasks that unsettled her. It was Victor himself. He watched her, not in a cruel way, but carefully, like he was measuring something she couldn't see. How she handled pressure, how she spoke when people dismissed her, how she reacted when someone snapped at her for mistakes that weren't hers. It felt less like a job and more like a test. Each day, Ella wondered what he was looking for, and why, out of all the people he could hire, he'd chosen her. Ella's days blurred into nights, and nights bled straight back into mornings. She worked Victor's schedule by day, calls, errands, endless lists, and when the mansion lights dimmed, she ran straight to the cafe to pull the closing shift. By the time she stumbled home, the sky was already lightening, birds cutting through the cold dawn air. She stopped counting hours of sleep. There weren't enough to matter. Her hands trembled pouring coffee, her legs ached climbing marble staircases, and sometimes she caught her reflection in passing windows, eyes ringed dark, shoulders slumped, moving like someone running out of fuel. But quitting, that wasn't an option. Rent still came. Bills still waited. Her brother still needed bus money for school, and Victor was still watching her with that same quiet intensity, as though he knew she was close to breaking, yet wanted to see if she would. So she didn't. She refused to. It was late when Victor finally spoke. The mansion was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. Ella was finishing paperwork in the corner of his study. The only sound the scratching of her pen and the rain tapping against the tall windows. Victor set his glass down. "You're wondering why I hired you," he said, voice low. Ella froze, pen hovering above the page. He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. "I started with nothing, too," he said slowly. "People like us. We work harder because we have no choice." The words caught her off guard. She had imagined him born into wealth, handed power on a silver platter. But there was something raw in his tone, something that didn't belong to boardrooms or billionaires. "I know what it's like," he added softly, "to feel the whole world waiting for you to fail." For the first time, his silence cracked, and Ella saw not just a boss, but a man carrying ghosts of his own. The days stacked up, long and relentless, but Ella never crumbled. When someone snapped at her, she answered with calm. When whispers trailed behind her, she turned them into quiet fuel. She arrived before dawn, left long after dark, carrying exhaustion on her shoulders like armor. Victor noticed from his office window. From boardroom tables, he watched her handle storms most people would run from, the way she kept her voice steady under pressure, the way she refused to break when others tried to make her small. One evening, as she crossed the hall balancing a stack of files taller than her arms, something caught in Victor's chest. A memory. His mother bent over scrub brushes, hands cracked from soap, standing proud despite the world trying to shrink her. Ella had that same fire. That same quiet defiance. Respect began to grow, not in words but in the silent way he looked at her now. It happened late one evening in the study. Victor leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on Ella as she sorted through paperwork. "What would you do," he asked suddenly, "with a cafe chain that's bleeding money?" Ella froze, unsure if he was joking. He wasn't. She hesitated. The safe answer caught in her throat, but something in his steady gaze pushed her past fear. "I'd make them student cafes," she said finally, voice steadying as she spoke. "Cheap coffee. Open late. Free Wi-Fi. A place people actually want to be." Victor studied her like she'd just spoken a language no one else had. Wasn't the answer he expected, but it was the first time she looked him in the eye and didn't flinch. Victor leaned back slowly, her words hanging in the air between them. "Turn them into study cafes," Ella repeated, bolder now. "Cheap coffee. Fast Wi-Fi. Open late. Students need places like that." He tilted his head, watching her closely. Most people in this house chose their words carefully around him, afraid of saying the wrong thing. But she spoke like someone who had nothing to lose. Victor expected excuses, maybe hesitation. Not this spark of certainty from the girl who'd once spilled coffee on him. He pictured it for a moment. Quiet corners filled with students, laptops glowing, cups clinking softly. A whole chain reborn into something people actually needed. It was simple, unpolished, and maybe brilliant. For the first time in weeks, Victor felt a flicker of curiosity. This girl might be more than just a waitress with tired eyes. Victor slid a folder across the desk. "One cafe," he said simply. "One chance. If it fails, we don't speak of this again." Ella stared at the address on the page. A tired little shop on the edge of town. Peeling paint. Flickering sign. The kind of place people passed without noticing. That night she rolled up her sleeves. She spent hours after work sketching menu ideas on scraps of paper. She bargained with a friend from the cafe for leftover paint. She borrowed ladders, dragged furniture, scrubbed floors until her arms ached. By day she handled Victor's calls. By night she hung string lights with blistered hands, painted walls in second-hand sneakers, and tested coffee recipes until the sun came up. Sleep vanished. Again, but this time it didn't feel like survival. It felt like building something that might finally be hers. Rain streaked down the windows just like that first day. But this time Ella wasn't holding a tray. She stood behind the counter of the cafe she had rebuilt with her own hands, heart thundering as the door swung open. One student came in. Then another. Within an hour, tables filled with open laptops, backpacks slung across chairs, steam curling from cups of coffee she had priced cheap enough for anyone to afford. The place buzzed with quiet energy, typing, laughter, the scrape of chairs. The old cafe that once felt like a dying room now pulsed with life. Victor arrived near closing. He said nothing at first, just watched the crowd. The glow of screens reflecting in the windows, the warm hum of voices rising over the storm outside. Ella poured him a cup of coffee with trembling hands. This time, she didn't spill it. For the first time in months, she felt something she hadn't dared to believe in. Hope. Victor sat alone at a corner table, coat draped on the chair beside him, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. He wasn't looking at Ella directly. He was watching the room. The glow of laptops, the scrape of chairs, the soft hum of late-night conversations. Students crowded the tables, caffeine and ambition mixing in the air like electricity. It had been years since he saw one of his businesses breathe like goo. This year since anything surprised him, Ella moved through the cafe like she owned it, fixing a crooked sign, laughing with a customer, scribbling ideas on scraps of paper between orders. Every corner carried her fingerprints. The numbers on his tablet kept climbing. But that wasn't what made him pause. It was the warmth, the life. Somehow this girl who had spilled coffee on his suit had poured something back into his world, something he thought money had taken forever. For the first time in years, Victor Hale smiled like a man watching the sun rise after a long, cold night. It started with whispers. A spreadsheet left on Victor's desk. Numbers highlighted in red. Notes scribbled in the margins. Accusations dressed as facts. Victor's assistant, a man who had fetched his coffee for 6 years without ever being noticed, suddenly had plenty to say. "She's moving money," he claimed softly. "Check the receipts. She's hiding something." Victor didn't react, but the silence in the room grew heavy. By evening, the story spread through the office halls like smoke. Ella didn't hear it from Victor. She heard it from the stairs, the murmurs cutting off when she walked by. The girl who turned one cafe into a miracle now wore suspicion like a scarlet letter. She counted the cash herself, traced every receipt with shaking hands, but lies move faster than truth. For the first time since meeting Victor, she felt the ground beneath her begin to crack. Rain soaked her hair as security walked her to the curb. No shouting, no chance to explain. Just cold instructions and the slam of the cafe door behind her, the same place she painted, scrubbed, and brought back to life now turned its lights off on her, like she was a stranger. Students inside watched through the windows as Ella stood there, arms wrapped around herself, shivering. Her hands still smelled of coffee and cleaning spray. She wanted to scream that she hadn't taken a dime, that this dream was hers too, but the words never left her throat. Rain only fell harder. It felt like the whole city was laughing at the girl who thought she could climb out of her story. Ella walked away slowly, each step heavier than the last, as if hope itself had decided to stay behind. Victor sat alone in his study, the glow of the desk lamp stretching shadows across the room. Stacks of receipts, balance sheets, and security logs lay scattered in front of him. He read each one carefully, jaw tight, eyes narrowing with every page. It didn't take long to see it. The cafe's numbers matched perfectly. No missing cash, no strange transfers. Ella's reports were clean, cleaner than most of his own managers kept theirs, and then the assistants forged notes. Different ink, wrong dates, sloppy lies pretending to be proof. Victor leaned back slowly, the leather chair groaning under him. She had been telling the truth all along. A muscle in his jaw twitched as the realization sank in. He had let her walk out under the weight of someone else's. Jealousy, for the first time in years. Victor Hale wasn't angry about money. He was angry for someone else, and that was far more dangerous. The call came just after midnight. Ella sat on the edge of her bed, a single lamp glowing, bills scattered across the blanket. Her phone buzzed once. She almost didn't answer. "Come back," Victor said simply. His voice carried none of its usual command. "I made a mistake." Ella didn't speak right away. She stared at the peeling paint on her wall, at the shoes drying near the door, at the life that had taught her too many times that people rarely mean what they say. "I don't want your money," she said finally, her voice low but steady. There was a pause on the other end. "Then come back for something bigger," Victor replied. "Come back for what you built." Those words stayed with her long after the call ended, because he was right. This wasn't about a paycheck anymore. It was about walking through those doors with her head high and proving the world wrong. The boardroom smelled of cologne, paper, and quiet power. A dozen men in dark suits tapped pens against expensive notepads, murmuring about market shares and quarterly losses. Then the door opened. Victor Hale walked in first, sharp as ever. Behind him came Ella in her thrift store blazer, the one with the loose button she'd stitched back on last night. No one paid her more than a glance until Victor spoke. "She runs the new division," he said, sliding a folder onto the polished table. The words hit like a thunderclap. Chairs creaked. Pens froze midair. Someone near the end smirked. "Her?" Not softly enough, Victor didn't blink. "She turned a dying cafe into our fastest-growing asset in 3 months. While you doubted her, she delivered numbers you couldn't." Ella stood tall, heartbeat drumming in her ears, but her face gave nothing away. For the first time, the room of corner offices and gold watches was looking at her like she belonged. Victor pushed the folder closer. "She runs it," he repeated. "Any questions?" It started with 5 cafes. Ella walked through each one like a storm of purpose, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, a notebook tucked under her arm. She rearranged furniture herself, talked to baristas by name, asked students what they wanted more of. By month's end, 5 became 10. She spent mornings tasting new menu ideas, afternoons negotiating supply deals, nights answering emails until her eyes burned. The same girl who once counted tips for rent now studied spreadsheets like her life depended on them, because in many ways it still did. 20 cafes by Christmas. Students lined up out the doors. Bloggers wrote articles about the study cafe revolution. Investors began calling Victor, curious about the girl leading his fastest-growing division. But Ella didn't stop to celebrate. She was too busy running between meetings, fixing coffee machines, and scribbling ideas on sticky notes stuck to her kitchen walls. For the first time, the future wasn't chasing her. She was chasing it. The first article hit on a Tuesday morning. From waitress to CEO, the Ella Martin story by noon. 3 more news outlets picked it up. Photos of her standing beside Victor in a navy blue blazer flooded the internet. Cameras loved the contrast. The billionaire in tailored suits. The girl who once spilled coffee on him, now leading his fastest-growing division. Employees who once laughed behind her back now shared her interviews on LinkedIn, pretending they had believed in her all along. The same manager who nearly fired her at the cafe tried to call, but she let it ring. Board members who once rolled their eyes at her plans now quoted her in meetings. Investors requested lunches. Students lined up to shake her hand at openings. In quiet corners of the city, the whispers that once mocked her name now carried something else entirely. Respect. Ella read none of the headlines. She was too busy planning the next store, the next city, the next dream, because success, she learned, wasn't about proving doubters wrong. It was about proving herself right. Victor stood at the back of the newest cafe, hands in his pockets, watching a line stretch out the door. The walls were covered in student artwork. Laptops glowed on every table. The air smelled of espresso and ambition. At the center of it all was Ella, signing papers, shaking hands, laughing with a group of college kids like she hadn't built an empire in less than a year. Victor walked over slowly. She noticed him only when the crowd parted, like the universe giving them space. "That coffee spill," he said finally, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Best accident of my life?" Ella laughed softly, shaking her head. For him, maybe it was an accident. Her twist of fate. For her, it was never that simple. Spilling that coffee had cost her humiliation, nearly her job, even her dignity for a while. But it had also lit a fire she didn't know she carried, the kind that kept her painting walls at midnight and building menus when everyone else slept. She looked around at the crowded cafe, at the life beating inside it, then back at Victor. "No," she said quietly, "it was survival. Life has a way of knocking us flat when we least expect it. A spilled cup of coffee, a pink slip on a desk, a door slammed in our face. In the moment, it feels like the end, like the universe chose us for its next cruel joke, but sometimes it's not the end at all. Sometimes it's the spark, the push we never would have taken on our own, the accident that forces us to fight, to climb, to build something we didn't even know we were capable of." Ella didn't just build cafes. She built herself back from nothing, from rain-soaked nights, empty pockets, and a world that laughed at her. What looked like ruin had simply cleared the path for something bigger, something brighter. Because fire doesn't just destroy, sometimes it forges. To the ones barely hanging on, the dreamers with empty wallets and calloused hands, listen closely. If you're tired, if you're broke, if the world points and laughs when you fall, don't quit. The nights will feel endless. The bills will mock you from the kitchen table. People will talk like chasing your dream is a waste of breath. But sometimes life needs chaos before it gives you a chance. One wrong turn, one bad day, one mistake that feels like the final straw might be the spark that changes everything. Ella's was a coffee spill. Yours could be next. And when it comes, when the world thinks it's the end, stand up anyway. Because what looks like disaster today could be the start of your story tomorrow.